Welcome back to the channel. This is a More Better SN coming at you with a sick deck. This is a deck that's been around for a while, lots of different iterations of it, but this deck in particular for mine is a legacy deck, so it opens up a lot more cards and a lot more possibilities than the standard or the modern versions and stuff like that of this. This is a Jodah the Unifier deck. Jodah is a legendary human wizard that is a lord for legendaries, basically. He is the ultimate lord for humans, legendary humans. Let's get into the deck. It's a full aggro deck. Everything is a creature. We're going 5 color. It's only $128. A lot of these legends are pretty cheap. To be honest, I'm pretty sure majority of the money for this deck comes from the mana base. So every single card in our deck is a creature, and they are all legendary humans. So let's get into it and talk about what we got going on here. So at 1 mana, we have Ashnod Flesh Mechanist. This is a 1 black for a 1/1 Death Touch. I'm not going to really be using the other abilities on this creature. It's basically just a way to have a 1-drop for the Cascade from Jodah later, and I will explain that when we get to Jodah. But this is just to have a 1 mana creature and something with Death Touch. Coming up at number 2, we got a white and green human warlock Catilda Dawnheart Prime. This is a 1/1 with protection from werewolves, but the main real feature we're going to be using on this is the human creatures you control have tapped to add 1 mana of any of this creature's colors. This is going to be a way to get Jodah onto the battlefield, or just any other creature that we have in our hand onto the battlefield faster. Good ramp card, because it basically turns all of your creatures, since we're all humans, into mana dorks. So you're going to have tons of mana. Then next we got a white-blue Denic Pious Apprentice. This is a 2/3 with lifelink. It's a good way to just get a lifelink body onto the battlefield early. And then it stops all graveyard shenanigans as well, because his cards in graveyards can't be targets of spells or abilities. And then if he dies, if you have no other play, you can do a disturb cost for 4, and then he becomes a 3/2 flyer that creates clues when creatures die. But just a nice value for sure in this card. Then we have Thalia, Guardian of Thraben. It's a 2 mana white 2/1 with first strike, and then it adds a tax. Non-creature spells cost 1 more to cast. We don't have any non-creature spells, so it's really only taxing our opponent, which is perfect. It's exactly what we want to do. It's just tax the opponent and make it harder for them to remove our stuff and to start casting their spells. Plus, once you get Jodah out there, having a big body with first strike is definitely helpful. Next, we have Hajar, Loyal Bodyguard. This is part of our protection package. This is a red and green human soldier, and it's a 3/3 for 2, which is already great, but then it comes with this additional ability that if you sacrifice this creature, legendary creatures you control get +1/+0 and get indestructible until end of turn. So, if they try to board wipe, or they try to take out one of our big creatures that's a key piece, we can just sacrifice a jar. Or if we're going in for an attack with a lot of creatures, we went wide, we can also sacrifice a jar to get that extra 1 damage per creature. Next up, Kellen Daring Traveler. This is a white 2 mana for a 2/3. This has an adventure spell as well. The adventure side says it's a 1 green sorcery that lets you create X map tokens, where X is 1 plus the number of opponents who control an artifact. So, you know, in case one of your opponents created a map token or a clue or a treasure or whatever, you can get an additional map. But this is also just a good turn 1 play if you have the ability to play the turn 1 play, just to get a free map. So later on in the game, when you have an extra mana free, you can just throw that map on somebody or go get a land. But the real point we have him in the deck for is the other side, which is the creature side. It's a 2/3 that says whenever Kellen Daring Traveler attacks, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card with mana value 3 or less, put it into your hand. Otherwise, you may put it into your graveyard. So if you look at the the deck here, everything from the first 2 columns is 3 mana or less, so you have a very good shot at hitting something with the Kellen, which is definitely a good value. Because you can just keep attacking this every turn and just keep adding more and more cards to your hand. Speaking of cards in your hand, we have Rona. It's a blue 2 mana for a 1/3. And it says whenever you cast a legendary spell, which is 99% of the spells in our deck, you can untap her, and it has the ability to tap it and draw a card, then discard a card. So it's a good way of just cycling through your hand if you have multiples of some of these legendaries that you can't cast because you have, like, if you get, let's say you got 3 Catildas in your hand, definitely draw and discard with Rona and cycle some of those out, so that you can keep having relevant spells in your hand. This is just a really good way of doing that with her. Next up is the only non-legendary creature we have in our deck, but for good reason. We have 2 of these. It's a 2 mana 2/3, white and black. Legendary humans you control have indestructible. This is an insane card for this deck. If you can get this out early and you can protect this creature and all of your creatures have indestructible, the game's pretty much over. There's no stopping this deck if you can't remove what I have. So this is definitely a must-add, even though it is not legendary. We have Inti, which is a 2 mana red 2/2, and this is basically for giving Jodah trample, or some of our other big creatures trample. Whenever you attack, you may discard a card. When you do, put a 1/1 counter on target attacking creature. It gains trample until end of turn. Whenever you discard 1 or more cards, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card into your next end step. So this is kind of like a Rona. It has two abilities on it. You can discard a card and give a creature trample, like Jodah. And then also when you're discarding, you're exiling the top card of your library. So you're going to be discarding cards that you don't need. And then hopefully when you exile the top card of your library, you can play that card that you exiled. Now we got some more lifelink to go with Dennick. This is Shana, Purifying Blade. This is in Bant colors, 3 mana 3/3 with lifelink. And at the beginning, this is one of the best abilities, especially when you get her huge after Jodah gives her a boost. At the beginning of your end step, you may pay X. If you do, draw X cards. X can't be greater than the amount of life you gain this turn. So at the end of your turn, when you're on your end step, whatever mana you have left, or if you want to tap some of your creatures because of Catilda, you can draw that many cards. So we don't have any really, we have one, instant play or flash play in this deck. So if you don't have that card, just dump all your mana into Shana and draw as many cards as you can, and it's just going to keep your hand full. She's great. We have one of our removal creatures right here. This is Lagrella. This is another Bant 2/3 for 3 mana. And it's basically like an exile effect. So when this creature enters, you can exile any number of other target creatures controlled by different players until Lagrella leaves the battlefield. So basically, you can take one of their things and have it exiled under this creature, or you can take one of their things and one of your things at the same time. And then if Lagrella gets destroyed, they both return to the battlefield, but your creature returns to the battlefield with 2+1/+1 counters on it. The usual play for this is to take one of their creatures and your Dennick, and then cast a new Dennick. And then if Lagrella dies, you can always cast the other Dennick from exile for its disturb cost, and then it comes in as a 4/5 with lifelink, which is a very big boy for lifelink. We got one copy of Reki, The History of Kamigawa. This is an older card, but it definitely is up to the task with this deck. Stats aren't that great. It's only a 1/2 for 3 mana, but it has whenever you play a legendary spell, draw a card. Every single spell in our deck is legendary, so you're going to be drawing tons of cards between Reki and Shana. Now we have our Lord of the Rings card here. This is why this is in a legacy format, because of this card. This is one of the cards in here that causes that. This is a 3 mana red and white 2/3 And it says, whenever Theoden, King of Rohan, or another human enters the battlefield under your control, target creature gains double strike until end of turn. So, if you cast 2 small creatures, or you cast something and it cascades into another, you're going to get multiple creatures getting double strike until end of turn. So definitely going to be putting that on your life linkers and getting that life total up, or you could put it on the big bodies. And then if you have Inti out there, you can give it double strike and trample, and it's just a snowball effect from there. Up next, we have Kellen the Kid. This is a Bant 3-mana 3/3 with flying and lifelink, another lifelinker. And this card really works well with Jodah and Dejero and Hazoret. It says, whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, so meaning like a Cascade or from exile, you could cast a permanent spell with equal or lesser mana value from your hand without paying its mana cost. If you don't, you may put a land card from your hand on the battlefield. So if you have extra lands in your hands from drawing all these cards, you can throw a land into play to kind of ramp up. Or if you had cast something and you have something with lesser mana value in your hand, you can just toss that out onto the battlefield for free. Now, it won't trigger Jodah again for the Cascade, but you're just getting an extra creature out there for free. So with Jodah, with the Cascade, you cast something pretty big, you get another thing, and then you can even get a third thing with Kellen. So the value here, the value engine, once it gets rolling, is insane. Next up, we have our 4-mana spells. Now we're getting into the bigger creatures here. Even though this is only a 2/3, this is a 4-mana red and green, first strike and reach. Reach is important. We only had that one flying creature. Otherwise, we really don't have much that can stop some flyers here. But at the beginning of combat on your turn, put X 1/1 counters on another target creature you control, where X is Helena and Elena's power. That creature gains haste until end of turn. So this is basically in here as a haste enabler for Jodah and Dejero. We want Jodah to attack. We want it to have haste. We want to put 1/1 counters on it. And if Jodah's out in the battlefield, everybody's going to get a boost. So Helena Elena's power is going to be huge, and you're going to be putting 7 +1/+1 counters on creatures. So you just load up your life linkers with these 7 +1/+1 counters, and it's gonna get crazy quick. We have 1 Urtai Resurrected. This is that flash spell that I was talking about. This is a 4-mana blue-black 3/2. You can flash this into the battlefield and either counter a spell or destroy a creature or planeswalker, and then that controller, your opponent, draws a card. So we only have 1 of these in here. I've seen arguments of people putting in more, putting in 3 at least. I only put the 1 just because I had so many other things that I wanted to fit in here. This is kind of just a one-off just because it's a 3/2 for 4 mana, and we already have Helena and Elena as a kind of underpowered 4-drop. So if you don't have Jodah out, you're going to have underpowered creatures on your battlefield. Not to say you can't win without Jodah. It just is a very, very nice, helpful thing to have out there in a deck like this. Up next, 2 copies of Thalia and Gitrog Monster. This is a 4-mana white, black, green. First strike, death touch. So, ultimate defender, first strike, death touch. Nothing really is going to get past this. So, you can just leave this as a permanent blocker, or you can attack. And its abilities say you can play an additional land on each of your turns. So, that's good. That gives you that ability that Kellen already had. Creatures and non-basic lands your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped, so it's kind of like Authority of the Consuls, but it also is for non-basic lands as well, which is great. And every time this creature attacks, you have to sacrifice a creature or land and then draw a card. So basically what you really want to do is you want to sacrifice a land and then draw a card and then play another land so that you still have the same amount of lands. Or you just don't attack with this. You leave it on defense so that your opponent doesn't want to attack in at all. And then you can just keep playing extra lands every turn. And with the amount of draw that we have, you're going to have extra lands in your hand. All right, another Lord of the Rings card, Baragon of the Guard. It's a 4-mana white 3/3. This card is crazy for 4 mana. Whenever this creature or another human enters the battlefield under your control, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain vigilance until end of turn. So, like I was saying before, you're going to be putting out multiple creatures per turn, and sometimes for free. But it just says when it enters the battlefield, not if it was cast. So when these creatures keep hitting the battlefield, all your creatures are going to keep getting boosted. +1/+1, +1/+1, +1/+1. Just going to keep going up that turn, and then they're all going to have vigilance. So there's no reason not to just full swing with everything, because you don't have to worry about a crackback. So this is definitely a great card to have in your deck. All right, now to talk about Jodah, the main card of this entire deck. Jodah the Unifier, 5 color, 5 mana, 5/5. And he has 2 abilities, and both of them are just as important as the other one. There's not one that I would say is better than the other. Legendary creatures you control get +X/+X, where X is the number of legendary creatures you control. So it's like a continuing to rise Lord. So just Jodah by himself being out in the battlefield, if he's alone, he's 1 legendary creature, so he still gets +1/+1. So he really is a 5 mana 6/6, but it's just listed as a 5/5 on the card. And then the next ability is, once he's in play, if I cast another legendary spell from my hand, now mind you, it has to be from your hand, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a legendary non-land card with lesser mana value. So literally every single card in our deck, other than General's Enforcer, is qualified for this. Then you may cast that card without paying its mana cost and put the rest in the bottom of your library in a random order. So you have Jodah out there, you cast a Baragon of the Guard, you're going to go through the top card of your deck and reveal it until you hit something that is under 4 mana. So literally these entire 2 columns minus the General's Enforcer. So any card from over here, if you just happen to draw one of those or exile it off the top, it gets to go into play for free. So now you can see that the ultimate value engine is Jodah. And up next, we have Jeru and Hazoret. This is a Jodah Jr. almost. This is a 5 mana, red-white, 5/4. As long as you have 1 or fewer cards in hand, so like let's say we didn't draw a bunch of cards with Shauna or with Reki, and we were able to just unload our hand and we don't have much left in our hand. If we have 1 or fewer cards, this creature has vigilance and haste, which is great because you get to attack right away with it, because that's what you really want to do with this creature. Because the next ability says, whenever Jeru and Hazoret attacks, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may exile a legendary creature card from among them. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order, and until the end of your turn, you may cast the exile card without paying its mana cost. So you're going to exile the top 6. You're going to pick whichever creature you want out of that, since our whole deck is legendaries. And then you can put that into play for 0 mana, which won't trigger Jodah because it'll trigger... It wasn't from your hand, it was from exile. And you just get to put that in for free. So that's looking at the top 6 cards of your library, if you don't have a Jodah in play, is an easy way to try and find one. Because 6 cards is a lot to look at, especially off the top of their deck, especially when you're at 5 mana. So don't have much of you have a lot of your deck already drawn. So if you haven't gotten a Jodah yet, you definitely have a much higher probability of landing one of them and getting to cast it for free. So that's the creatures. We got a 2.95 average mana cost. That's pretty high, but we do have Catilda. I know this is a 62 card deck. It's really hard to make cuts. If you know any cuts that you think you would make, please leave a comment down below. Let me know what you would cut out of this deck, because I can't find anything that I would really want to cut. Let's get into the mana base. 23 lands because we have Catilda. And our lands basically solve all of our problems when it comes to the fact that we have a 5-color deck. We have Ancient Ziggurat that can tap for any color for creature spells, and we only have creature spells, so that's perfect. We have Plaza of Heroes, which casts for any color for legendaries, which we have 99% legendaries. Unclaimed Territory for humans, Secluded Courtyard for humans, Reflecting Pool to add 1 mana of any type that a land you control could produce. So basically, just 2 more wild cards of whatever anything else can tap for. We have a Naiganjo for some interaction, because it's going to cost 1 white every time, because it gets 1 less to activate for each legendary creature, and it deals 4 damage to target attacking or blocking creature. It's just a nice way to throw in a little bit of interaction. Plus, white mana is the highest amount of pips in our deck with 28. So it's highest, second highest to 20, but like all these other smaller colors in blue, black, and red, it's almost doubled. So it's nice to have that extra flexibility of the white mana right there. And then we have the Great Hall of the Citadel. I thought about taking this out just because I don't really see a need for it. I might replace it with something else that taps for human. But this taps for colorless, and you could pay 1 and tap it and add 2 mana in any combination of colors. Spend this mana only to cast legendary spells. This taps for colorless, this taps for colorless, this could tap for colorless. This can too, this can't. So if you have an Ancient Ziggurat out there, you can't tap that to activate this, but it still works. The Great Hall of the Citadel definitely still works as a land in this deck. These are just some options that I've been looking at in replacing some things in this deck. I have a Yoshimaru already. I already had that in the deck and I took it out. Maybe replace Ashnod with this as my 1-drop. So I can get rid of the 1/1 with Death Touch, but instead have one that just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger for every single legendary permanent. So this thing gets out of control, especially for a 1-mana 1/1. This is from the Assassin's Creed set. This is a 2-mana Dimir 2/2. And I kind of wanted to replace something with this because it says whenever you cast a historic spell, draw a card. And then this creature can't be blocked. And this triggered only once each turn. So every turn you're going to be casting an historic spell. So that means you're going to be drawing a card every turn, and then this creature can't be blocked. And then whenever it deals combat damage to a player, put a 1/1 counter on it. So it's just going to keep snowballing more and more and more. So this is definitely going to be a thought of an ad. And then I just have to figure out what 2-mana creature or even some of the higher end stuff that I would take out instead for that. So if you know of anything that I should swap out for him, because he seems like he could be dangerous in this deck, let me know. And then if for a top end, for another 4-mana, other legendary creatures you control have Menace. It just gives another way of finishing it off in case you don't have an Inti to give certain things trample. They can at least have Menace, and then it cuts down the amount of blockers that can block your creatures. And then whenever you play a legendary land or cast a legendary spell, you draw a card and lose 1 life. So losing 1 life's no good, but you do get to draw a card. So it's another way of drawing cards for casting legendary spells, which is definitely something that I'd like to do, because drawing cards is definitely the most important thing for this deck, because you want to get the correct creatures out there. You want to get to your Jodah. You want to get to everything that you really need. But this deck is pretty crazy. When it goes off, it goes off. You don't need Jodah to win the game. It's a little bit more difficult, but with the amount of value and the amount of abilities that these creatures have that all interact with each other, the synergy is insane. You don't need Jodah to win. But if you do get Jodah out, it's almost a guaranteed win unless they can remove it. Just because this deck gets crazy, especially with Jodah out there. The amount of value that you can put out on the battlefield, and then everything's getting +X for all the creatures that you have out there. It gets pretty crazy. So if you have any questions, or you have any things that you'd like to add to this deck, or you'd like to swap out, please leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear it. But until then, I'm a More Better Ascend, and I'll see you tomorrow for another deck.